Okay, next we're going to do a couple more things. We're going to go over shadows. We're going to go over borders and border radius. And then we're going to go over, well, actually we can start, because it's quite simple, text alignment. Very easy. So you'll notice in the demo, these titles, they're centered. So let's add that. All right, here our titles are on the left. So where are they? It's hashtag or .card h2. Here it is. Very simple. Text dash align. And then you can choose any of these, but we're going to go with center, of course. Bada bing, bada boom. Done. Works like a charm. You could do the same thing with your paragraphs if you wanted. In fact, I just realized the padding or the margins in these paragraphs is a little bit off. I must have forgotten to add that. Yeah, see? There's some space between the paragraphs here. So let me just quickly fix that. I seem to have forgotten to add it. We can add margin bottom 1em. That's pretty good. And I don't quite like how close these lines are to each other, so we can also set the line height property to something like maybe 1.35em. There's a little bit more space between the lines, and that to me makes it easier to read. Okay, now we can go into borders and border radiuses. So we already talked about border. I mean, we didn't talk about it, but we used it. And so I'll show you around the card. We commonly just write quickly 1 pixel solid red, right? Just to show. And that's how you can add the border. But what do all of these mean? So this first value refers to the thickness of the border. 1 pixel is pretty much the smallest you can get to. If I change this to 1em, you'll notice it'll be about 16 pixels thick, but that's too much. So with borders, usually it's better to use pixels. Let's set maybe 2 pixels would be nice. Yeah, that's a little bit nicer. The second value here refers to the type of border. So solid means that the whole thing is just painted. You can also do something else, like dashed, and that will create a border that looks like this, right? A dashed border. You could also set this to dotted, and that will create a dotted border like this, right? And of course the last one refers to the color, which could be anything, including an RGB value, right? So if I set this to maybe 230, you get a very, very subtle dotted border around, and that actually looks quite nice. In fact, I might just keep that. So that's how the border property works. And another thing you can set to do with borders is called border radius. And that refers to, see how these corners, they're all very harsh, 90-degree corners. In the demo, it's a little hard to spot, maybe easier on the bottom, but they're rounded. And that's because they have a certain amount of border radius. So you can set border radius and pick some value. So let's say I chose 1em. See, now they're slightly rounded here. It's nice to play with this value here. I think 1em refers to how deep does the curve start. It would be 1em deep. But really a lot of this design stuff is more of just trial and error, kind of look and feel, you know. So maybe I'll set this to 0.75em instead. And you notice the curve is a little bit smaller. So this looks pretty nice here. You can also use border radius on elements that don't even have a border. So I'll show you an example on the image. Here it is, heading IMG. I'll say border radius 1M. And you'll see it has a little bit of a curve on the borders, right, and the edges, or on the vertices rather. But if you want to make it rounded, you can actually use percentages. So if I do 25%, it's a little bit more rounded, but if you want a perfect circle, you can use 50%. There you go, makes a perfect circle. And they all look pretty good. In fact, I quite like the 25%. You might want to keep that for yours. It looks quite nice. I'm just to stick to the demo, I'm going to use 50 though. And then actually the demo also has a border, so I will add that border. Border 3 pixels, solid white. So it looks something like that. That looks nice. And so now the last thing I want to talk about is shadows. So we've got a couple of shadows here. None on this page actually, but if I look at the demo, you notice there's a shadow, makes it look like this white area here is sitting above this purple area. Also little shadows below the cards. So you can do this with box shadow. And then also, and I'll show you that one, but also you'll notice, might be a little bit hard to notice, but I think there's a little bit of shadow below the title. And you can do that with text shadow. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't think there is, but I'll show you it anyways. So let's do text shadow first. Here we go. So text-shadow is the property name. And there's a couple values you need to specify. So there's actually 4. So the last one is the color of the shadow. The first one is the direction of the shadow, or how far away the shadow moves in the X direction. So if I set this to 10 pixels, you'll notice, oh, the internet's being slow again, but just bear with me here. Okay, it might be a little difficult to spot, but there is a pure black shadow appearing behind the element 10 pixels to the right. If I set this to -10, it would move 10 pixels to the left. And of course 0 is just doesn't move at all. You can't really even see it. The second value is the same but for Y. So I set this to -5 pixels. It moves up. If I set this to 5 pixels, it moves down, right? So maybe I'll set this to, good value might be 2, maybe 3 pixels. Maybe a little bit more. I'll set it to 4. Okay, and then this third value refers to blurring. How blurred is it going to be? So you could set this to some pixel value. So let's say 3 pixels blurring, where it blends in with 3 pixels. I could set this to 5, and you'll see it gets even more blurry. That's pretty good, I think. But it's a little bit, the shadow's a little bit too harsh. So like I was saying earlier, what I'm actually going to be using for shadows instead is that RGBA. And I'll use pure black, but then I'll just play with the last value, which is the opacity. So set this to maybe 0.3 or something. If I run that, now it's much, much more subtle. You can kind of see it. If I was to remove this line with a comment, you'll be able to tell the difference. There it's just kind of flat. And then I add it, and there's a very, very subtle illusion of height on the title. I quite like that. Okay, that's text shadow. Sorry, that's text shadow. Now let's go over box shadow, which takes the exact same inputs, but you would use text shadow on an element that is text, like this or like a paragraph or something. You'd use box shadow on an element that's not text, either a container or something else. So I'll be using box shadow on the image, and I'll be using box shadow on these card containers. So let's do the image first, right here. So box dash shadow, and it provides, or it takes the same inputs. So I'll just use this here. So 6 pixels down, 6 pixels of blurring, and RGBA. We use 0, 0, 0 again, and 0.2, 20% opacity. And notice the image now, it's very flat, and then I click run, and the image has a little bit of height because there's a shadow below it. There's actually an optional fifth input for the box shadow or the text shadow, and it's actually might not be in the text shadow, but definitely for the box shadow, and it's the inset input, where you can tell a shadow to kind of move in on itself. So you'll notice this here. So if I add a shadow to this heading, and notice we have one here, but if I add a shadow to the heading, which would be this whole purple box, I'll do box shadow 0 minus or 6 pixels, 6 pixels, RGBA 0, 0, 0, 0.3, something like this. You see the shadow bleeds below into the card area. So this makes it look like this heading is above. But we don't really want that. We want it to go the other way around. So I'll just add the inset input here. And notice what happens now. The shadow appears not on the bottom or the outside, but on the inside. It's up here at the top. This isn't quite exactly what we want though. We want it to appear on the bottom, so I'll just flip this Y value here from 6 pixels to minus 6 pixels. And now it appears at the bottom, just like that. So you can use inset to create that kind of inwards shadow. And now the last shadow is the one on the cards. So I'll go ahead and add that one. But again, it's the exact same kind of thing. Box shadow. This one will be 4 pixels moving down, 6 pixels of blurring. And again, I'll just do RGBA 0, 0, 0, 0.2. And there you go. There's a little bit of shadow below the cards. And now we're pretty much right there on par with the demo.